I think that's a really good place to start to talk about, like artist communities over the pandemic in relationship to that. So that's why I created this because I felt like I needed that over the pandemic. Um,
Yeah.
it really kind of blossomed right around then, right around March of 2020. We had some benefits and things in this space that were private, and we made them public, and a lot of people flocked to it. And I was just walking, maybe just thinking about this chat tonight, but I was walking somewhere in the city and thinking about the space and how interesting it is that over a year and a half of that, um, the space changes, right? Like these chats have had large present attendance, active present attendance, and also times where it's just like, me and the resident. Um, and it's just so interesting to like kind of clock that fluctuation and think about sort of like what a space, uh, how people relate to ownership of a space. Like at the very beginning, I feel like a lot of us, myself included, which is what kind of fueled making the space. Um, a lot of people I felt like were really like feverish to be actively involved because it was so healing to be like, oh, there's other people that want to talk about this stuff right now in a place where, I can't be with other people. But that's changed. And right now, like there's a lot more in-person stuff and it's interesting to like think about the evolution of even just this space, what will it become? But I guess I wanted to open on that just because I know yesterday uh, we were talking a bit about artist community stuff and art community stuff, kind of in tandem with our art making. So I was wondering, like, what that makes you think of?
Art community stuff. Um, yeah, well, what I was thinking about when you're talking about the beginning of the pandemic was um in like March 2020, uh when everything shut down, I wasn't really doing art at all, and I hadn't been for a little bit. Um, and I was at a point where I like actually was not sure if I should continue to do art at all or like try to be any kind of like professional or make some kind of job out of it. Because I was a little bit disillusioned with uh art world and not and just like I guess I was not feeling very hopeful about the ability to like sustain myself as an artist, and I had been doing uh, a barista job for 2 years, and I thought that I could kind of balance that with art making, but it turned out that even when I went to work in the morning and got out of work around noon, I was still so exhausted from how hard the work was that I didn't really have anything left to do artwork with after
Mm.
those shifts. So yeah, at the beginning of the pandemic, I started doing art again, kind of just for like practical reasons because I was organizing with Philly Socialists at that time, and they needed flyers and they needed like illustrations for their website and social media stuff. So just because they needed someone to do it, I started doing some drawings for them. And then other people did drawings too. And that was kind of nice because it was like for the first time in a while, I was like showing work to people and getting feedback on it about whether it was helpful or not or what we could change about it, and kind of like we would brainstorm together about what images would be the best for different campaigns we were doing. So kind of like accidentally I found an artist community doing that, and it just felt like really nice and uplifting to have people to bounce ideas around with.
Mhm.
So that's what I'm thinking of immediately is just like how I came across an art making community in the very beginning of 2020 that kind of helped like revitalize my interest in doing art and like change my perspective on why I should do it and that it could actually be really helpful and um yeah, have like an actual practical use. So it was really cool.
Yeah, definitely. I feel like I maybe have an idea of the answer, but I want to hear it in your words. Do you feel like after that, do you feel like that affected the art that you've been making?
Yeah. I had been doing work before that that had like a little bit of a political bend.
Mhm.
Um I did a lot of like city scenes and those would have like some stuff in it that was political or showed like some good or bad thing that had happened in the city, but it was kind of like passive and not
Mhm.
really making a statement. Um, so yeah, after I was doing like some propaganda
Mhm.
for organizing work, then yeah, I did get more interested in just like being very direct in my fine art work. So I started putting things in it that were very like overt messages.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
and yeah, not beating around the bush as much anymore.
Yeah, that's like that's so interesting. That's making me want to it's making me want to ask that to all of my peers, you know? Because I guess maybe we have enough hindsight now that we can kind of clock what those changes a bit more. You know, we can like read the tree rings. Um, because I guess I think I feel the same way. Like a lot of my art, my music writing is pretty. It's like self-portraiture is like the way that I always say it. But it's like been pretty abstract in its or like surreal or something in its storytelling. But I feel like the stuff that came out right right after the pandemic began got a lot more volatile. Uh, you know, like a different kind of passion, right? Like a different kind of channeling of something.
Yeah,
And a lot like more like I really felt like grasping at something, you know, like it felt a lot more like you know, feverish or something. And now even the stuff that I'm writing now, I almost feel like I've had enough time that I'm like well situated in that. And it's sort of alarming. Like I'll go to sit down and write something and I'm like, whoa, that came really fast. And it was like a lot more, you know, Jacob of 2019 even would have been like really surprised with some of the stuff that I'm writing. Uh, and I feel like that's maybe sort of similar. Like there's stuff that's you're talking about, like obviously like direct like political imagery, right? You know, like activism imagery and storytelling that's cannot be, you know, like you said, can't you be not being around the bush cannot be mistaken for something else. But
yeah,
um, yeah, that's really cool. I'm into that. You also talked about you said propaganda, and that made me think. Um, I don't know if you want to go down. We can go down this rabbit hole now or later. But you know, I was just thinking about like tapestries and like their very long history, of which I'm sure you can tell me a lot more than I know even. Um, but how you were talking about like subtlety of like storytelling, you know, like the
yeah,
like subtle like political narratives and things like that, and then like the very overt, and like I can kind of think of both of those just in the immediate, just in certain in um my very few examples of like favorite tapestries. There's, you know, but it tends to be kind of like political religious political implications in old school tapestries, whereas now it's cool to kind of like see the juxtaposition of subtlety versus in your face.
yeah, yeah.
But
I remember getting really inspired. I think probably 4 or 5 years ago at this point. The first time I saw war rugs, which
Mm.
continue to be a huge influence for me. Uh, but yeah, the first time I came across those, I don't know even where it was. It might have been like Pinterest or something. I was just kind of like researching fiber art, and I was just so blown away by like how direct they were. They were just like, I was like, oh, you can just put like 9/11 on a rug, like like you don't
Yeah.
have to couch it in like symbols and like hidden meanings of shapes and things. Like these people can just actually put down the things that they are seeing and are like haunting their psyche, that like
Hmm.
as a culture, like yeah, Afghan rug makers, they can actually
Right.
just reflect the things, like the images that are really affecting their lives, which is really cool. So yeah, that's definitely like something that marinated in my brain for a really long time. um yeah, and I when I was in when I went to college, in my last year of school was when I started doing fiber art, and I kept it really abstract because I don't know, that's what like a lot of my professors liked. They liked just shapes and stuff, and that seemed to be like what other people wanted me to do. Um, but as soon as I like was out in the world and actually like trying to find a reason why I should be making pieces, that was when I realized it was actually way more interesting and way easier to like connect with people over art if I was actually very explicit with images and meanings of things.
Yeah. That's really interesting. That's like my head's swimming. I think I was vaguely familiar with this before, and actually I'm realizing that um, I've seen this in your art. Like, I've seen it directly. So it's familiar because I've looked at your art, especially recently. Um, this is so interesting. I'm like so excited to delve deeper into this. This is so heavy. Um, yeah, so like important and heavy. Um, but that's like a really interesting thing to like not skip over, I guess. That like what you're saying, that like the connection with an audience or other artists can come from that stuff just being right in your face, like being very explicit and direct with your art making. And I think I struggle with that a lot. Um, hmm. Yeah, I think I think that I like think that's on a very personal level. That's really interesting. Because I have a really hard time in my own art doing that. Um,
Doing like explicit or abstract
yeah,
thing.
yeah, doing explicit. I think that the work that I do, I have a goal. Like I feel like some of us are very like single-minded, in the work that we're trying to make. And I have like a goal when I make my art, which is pretty much like creating a space that um, can be abstract enough that it can kind of feel like a dream. I'm obviously using like limited language to express this, but like can
Yeah.
feel like a dream, but in that sense, like kind of can also be wrapped around the person, so that they can do with it what they please. And that's been something I've been chewing on for probably my whole artistic career, like how to bridge that, how to come up with something that is like sort of sort of leading a direction, but also very much like up to interpretation, but always but always never up to interpretation in the heady way, like, ooh, it's whatever you want, but like, no, this is a space for you to come to kind of like feel this as you please. And usually the goal with that is make people feel comfortable or like they can explore an emotion deeply, but it becomes very like um, I don't know, it becomes like a conduit. Like it's the goal is that it becomes a conduit for the person. Um, and
Yeah.
maybe I've gone to that because it's very scary for me to feel like I can be at the helm of like, here, this is exactly what I want you to think, or this is exactly what I want you to see. I don't really know. I don't know why. I mean, I guess that's kind of giving me pause. Like I'm not really sure why that's the way that I work, but it's so interesting and powerful to think about, making art in that extremely direct way. It's very in a different way, it's very vulnerable, you know?
Yeah. There's two things I'm thinking about in response to that. One is that I still really love abstract visual art, even though I'm not really doing it currently. And I think it has a really important role. Like, I think there is an emotional aspect to looking at art, that's like not necessarily about what images you see, but it could be about colors or shapes or the size of something or um, I think that's all important, and I love going to look at something like a quilt that's just colors or shapes. Like, that's
Mhm.
still it still does something, I think, for people,
Yeah.
but um, for me, it's just not what I'm interested in making, and I think part of why I'm not interested in it anymore is because I've started to get so frustrated um with other people's narratives being so loud and kind of like getting in my head. I guess I could be more specific. Like um before I before the pandemic, I was organizing at my job, at my coffee shop, um trying to get my coworkers on board with starting a union, and I was really upset and angry a lot of the time because um if I or my coworkers would tell the bosses there was a problem, we were often told that it just wasn't like that. And
Mm.
I guess you could call that gaslighting. I know that's kind of a buzzword, but I think that might be actually what was going on. Because yeah, we would just be told that things we were dealing with at work didn't really exist or weren't really a problem. And then I was kind of also going through a lot of larger cultural narratives about service workers and how we're not skilled and we didn't deserve to be paid living wages or have comfortable schedules and
Mhm.
dignity at work.
Mhm.
um, and I felt like those stories were just so strong, and I was just I just wanted to come out with statements against that couldn't be misconstrued any other way.
Yeah.
Because I was just really tired of having my own experience told to me as if it weren't happening or as if it were happening differently. So it was kind of like a power thing to switch to uh, being very direct with the message, which is very vulnerable and scary,
Right.
but always seems to pay off, even when it's terrifying to put yourself out there like that.
Yeah. Right. Well, especially when I'm thinking about, the parallels of community building, union building, all of that stuff, and how all of that stuff is so um, uh, based in in putting yourself out there. It's based in uh, I guess the phrasing that I was taught once is like leading through vulnerability, right? Like, um, and that's true in the art. It's true in the community building that like you gotta do it yourself. You gotta show yourself. You have to trust that, especially if you're um, either if you're via your art, right? Your art is sitting among a community of peers right now, and also in a tradition. You're trusting that both your community of peers and your tradition are going to like raise you up, and in the community that in a community sense that the people are going to do that, and then you get to kind of like you get to heal the space or contribute to the healing of a space um, through exposing yourself, through being vulnerable. And,
Yeah. Yeah, I like that you're making that connection between a union at a workplace and a general type of community, because I feel like it is really true that like being vulnerable and talking about what you're really going through is a foundation of both of those things. Like
Mhm.
forming a union, um, the steps to doing that at work are going to each of your coworkers and listening to them talk about what's really going on with them, like what's their real experience at work. They might have to admit that like something's really difficult for them, or that they feel
Right.
like they're failing at something, and it can be really scary to share
Right.
that with people. But that's the same kind of thing that's really great about like an artist community, is admitting that like maybe you have no idea what's going on and you're you're insecure about what you're doing, and you're not sure where to go, and you're opening up and letting other people in there to hear about your struggles and maybe help you. And yeah, likely they have a similar experience going on, so it's like really bonding to be able to have like solidarity with other people about that.
Right. Yeah, I mean, even just like, you were you were saying the scariness of going up to a coworker, obviously like not a full stranger, but also not necessarily a friend, right?
Yeah.
And commiserating, or creating a space for them to commiserate and say, this is hard, or I'm scared, or I feel like I'm going to get hurt. And it like struck me, even like, interpersonal stuff, how like completely fucking difficult that is to do with like a loved one. Like
Yeah.
often we're kind of programmed to do the opposite. A lot of what we're programmed to do is don't share that, because then that'll burden them or something like that. I come up against that a lot in myself, like hearing that voice and shutting it down. Like, no, I need to be able to express myself, to like um place my feelings out into space, and like have that linger where we can all look at it and kind of like, you know nod at it together, acknowledge it. um and that's, yeah, it's striking me how difficult and how necessary that is in all of these spaces, especially ones with people you don't know, which is true in an art space.
Yeah, definitely.
The thing about art, like just kind of making comparisons between um worker community building, worker solidarity, and art stuff, is that it is very easy maybe to like think that your art is valuable. Like art is such an interesting thing, like where you were talking about like worker rights, and the narrative being like, oh, we're untrained workers, right? Like
Yeah.
this narrative that you don't have skill, versus art, which obviously has like a similar narrative in our structures, but among like insular groups, I feel like is like, no, like I know what I'm doing, like I think I'm good at what I'm doing. And it's funny, like they're almost opposite sides of the same coin to like deconstruct, to get to
Yeah.
that vulnerability.
Yeah, I have a lot of thoughts about um how artists like see themselves
Mhm.
as workers or not as workers.
Mhm.
Which like I didn't really get to fully unpack until very recently. Yeah, maybe like at the start of the pandemic when I started to go back to art, I started to look at it more through a working lens. Um, and I really became aware of how how toxic the kind of cultural message about artists has been for a long time, the kind of like starving artist trope that we're all just out here, we're all like individual geniuses who are just bootstrapping our way. We don't need like food or health insurance or anything because we're just gonna do our little paintings in our bedrooms, and we don't. It's a very like weird like hustle mentality that gets put on artists, and like we're expected to be okay with living in squalor until we get some kind of big break, and then it's fine and it's all worth it.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, it keeps us apart, right?
What's that?
Keeps us apart.
Well, yeah, exactly. And it's so isolating because I think like artists are taught to see each other as competition, and yeah, and we have no like kind of class solidarity. We don't think of our artist community as one big workforce because we all work for ourselves. Or I mean, people who do art for a living often are self-employed or freelancing. But yeah, I my perspective on it really changed in the last 2 years because I started to think like, oh, we all actually are a community with common interests, and we're being exploited because we let people convince a lot of us that we're each just our own person alone in the world, and no one's like us, and no one's gonna benefit. If we get anything, it's kind of like every man for himself kind of mentality that I feel like I absorbed in art school. So yeah, it's really cool to think about artists as like we're all kind of working at the same job, and we have different mediums, but we have a lot of similar interests and goals. Like it actually makes a lot more sense for us to collaborate and work in groups and negotiate with like museums and galleries and these big like institutions that run our lives as a group rather than as individuals.
Right. And even just raise each other up, you know? Like
Yeah.
That's really interesting. I've actually seen in like performing art scenes, I've seen a little bit of that. I've been very interested in following that, like musicians unions popping up, you know, like the idea of like a non-space specific musicians union popping up, or like co-ops and stuff like that. It's very interesting to see because that's of course like something a lot of musicians have wanted and maybe not had the tools to access, you know, like being in the music scene for, I mean, I've been in music and production for 10 years, like actively, and I've known about some of this stuff for longer, but just seeing like the effects of, you know, industry, like, you know, big corporations like Spotify and stuff affecting how musicians like, truly getting to say how musicians work, and make their livings, you know. I feel like yeah, this year has been so interesting, or I guess this 18 months has been so interesting. It'll continue to be interesting in terms of like people. I think people just being like, oh, well, maybe we can actually work together and do something different.
Yeah, it's very heartwarming to see that. Yeah, and it totally makes sense that musicians should all see themselves as one pool of talent, and just like actors who get to be part of a guild, or
Right.
there's some creative pathways that have more of a community, more of like a history of community, and others that have gotten really isolating. Visual art is very isolating right now. But
Right.
yeah, I think all of them have the potential to see themselves as part of the same community, and there's only benefits from doing that.
It's so like harrowing to think about. Sometimes what I'll do is in a conversation like this, or even in a conversation like this with myself, right? If I'm like just doing something and thinking about this, I'll kind of like I usually try to like channel, see if I can like hear the voice that's going on inside of me that might be like some of that programming, like stuff that
Yeah.
I'm not really acting on, but like what am I hearing in my head? And
Yeah.
one of the things that I'm thinking about is just this idea that it's so like just harrowing. I can't think of another word. That it's like we have to shout over each other. That the goal of art, there's only so much room for artists. There's only enough room for blank number of artists, and that our goal is to like get great so that we can shout louder than each other. And it's like truly like pass backwards. It's so weird, and it's weird to even kind of like put that to words in my in my head.
Yeah, it's a totally made up competition a lot of the time. Like yeah, like arts programming from the government or from like nonprofits might be pretty scarce, but that's not that's something that they make decisions about, and it's not like there isn't demand for art. Obviously, like somebody has to make everything we enjoy as culture, and everything has design that we use. So there is a huge need for creative people. It's just that uh, we've let ourselves be very devalued in a
Mhm.
money making sense.
Yeah. I know in our conversation yesterday, just to kind of like go on a quick tangent, or maybe a pause. In our conversation yesterday, you said that you might have some like material or media, just to kind of like give a brief overview of some of the artwork that you've done. Um, if you have any like slides or anything, if you want to pop them down in the Resident Artist chat channel?
I didn't really end up going through
Oh,
to
sure.
find pieces because, well, I was kind of busy today, and also a lot of it is on my website.
Right, right. Okay.
I can,
Yeah.
I mean, I guess I was thinking of rounding stuff up just in case there was like a specific piece
Mm.
I mentioned. I don't really feel like I've done that so far.
No worries. Yeah.
We would talk about
Well,
one.
yeah, we can definitely,
Yeah.
and I'd love to. The thing that specifically I was going to say, if it's okay, I see that we have two people in our audience, and one of them is a past resident,
Oh,
Nava, and I thought that she may be interested in both seeing your work and I don't know if asking a question or talking, but Nava, if you want to jump up and say hi, or if you want to type a question in the channel, you can do that. You should be able to do that. I'll give you the resident artist chat or resident artist status again. Um,
yeah. I mean, I'm happy to share. Like, I could share like some of the propaganda I did for
Mhm.
Daddy and Philly Socialists. Um, I could share some of the abstract work I did in school. I don't know, like what might be helpful.
Yeah, sure. You could also, I'd love to
Oh, can you
hear,
hear me?
hey, Nava.
Oh,
Yes.
hi. Sorry, I'm still struggling with the platform.
No, it's okay. Good.
Hi,
Welcome.
Tabitha. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, good to meet you online.
Yeah.
Um, Tabitha, do you want to talk about or tell us, I guess, a little bit about the work that you were doing at Glen Foerd? Because I'd love to hear that from
Yeah,
you.
we can definitely talk about that. And I don't have a great picture of the second piece I did there.
Mhm.
I can share the first piece. I got a good photo of it before I sent it off with them. Let me see.
Mhm.
Oh, it's too powerful. See, Discord doesn't like nice photos of stuff.
No, it doesn't.
No. Um, hmm. I can talk about it while I try and see how I can share that picture.
Oh, if you have it, you probably have it on. Do you have it on your Instagram? You
Oh.
could just link your Instagram or something.
Oh yeah, you're right. Let me do that. Yeah. So Glen Foerd.
Yeah, I guess it's easy because your Instagram page is open, so I can track it.
Oh great. Yeah, I'll post the link to that piece just in case someone else wants to see it. But yeah, so Glen Foerd is a residency that I just semi-finished. I'm gonna do one more piece for them because I'm stubborn and I had a vision for one more. So eventually I think I'm gonna add another piece, but there are two from me there right now. It's not letting me share this individual post, but I'll share my Instagram and both pieces I did at Glen Foerd are on there. They're the most recent fiber art pieces. So if you scroll past the drawings, you'll see them. So yeah, I applied to Glen Foerd in fall of 2020 when I still wasn't sure if I should do art like in the future. So just kind of on a whim, I applied because my friend told me about it and I was like, sure. And they ended up really liking my work and offering me the residency. And basically, it's one of these really old mansions in Philadelphia that are still around, and I think the city just has no idea what to do with most of them. They're just massive estates that once upon a time like were like a single family residence, but now they're just like sitting around on the riverbanks. Like there's one in Lemon Hill that I spent a lot of time around when I lived in that area in Brewery Town. But Glen Foerd is up in Torresdale, and the estate was owned for the longest period by Robert Federer, who was the owner of a leather company or a leather factory. So he lived at Glen Foerd in this giant like palace mansion, and he had a big factory in Frankfurt where Polish immigrants came to do the dirty work of making leather. And it was like the worst job you could do at the time because it was like that or coal mining, basically, were like the worst jobs you could do. Because to make leather, you had to use pure, which is poop from their dogs or birds or pigeons. So people just did this incredibly dirty, kind of torturous work and didn't make a lot of money doing it and made this guy super, super rich. So I was very interested in that because I already cared a lot about labor and I wanted to learn more about the history of labor in Philadelphia. So I researched the factory based on some materials they had in the archives at Glen Foerd, and I also looked through the estate just to like learn about what the estate owners, the factory owners were like. And I found it so interesting that they were extremely religious, like pious Lutherans, and were very like morally satisfied with themselves. Had a lot of like self-help books about how to be like a good person, and they had this whole picture of their lives and the system they were a part of where they were righteous and, doing good things. And then all the factory workers were also religious. They went to a Catholic church that still does Polish services in Bridesburg, and they really valued like being humble and hardworking and just kind of getting through it. So I was really fascinated by both of those kind of like class relationships to leather making, and also like the fact that they both used spirituality as like either an enabler or like a tonic for getting through the day. So the work I ended up making was very much like exploring the relationship between work and Christianity, because I also struggle a lot with kind of like what you said before about like the evil internal voice that sometimes comes out. Like my internal voice is very informed by the Protestant religion I grew up in. So and I feel like there's a lot of Protestant work ethic, like moralizing of hard work and like moralizing of suffering, that like you should always be pushing yourself to be really uncomfortable, or else you're just lazy or you're a bohemian layabout. That's kind of like what I internalized from my like weird Bible Belt upbringing. So yeah, I was figuring out how I could unpack that and like stop punishing myself as like a newly self-employed artist. And I was trying to understand like how spirituality could be a tool of oppression and also something that like could inspire justice for oppressed people, which is really interesting. So one of the pieces I made, it sits on an altar at Glen Foerd.
Wow.
And it's in the shape of a leather hide. So that's on my Instagram. Right. And has a lot of images of leather making. And another piece is one of two. So eventually I'm going to make this companion to it. And it's going to be the Gates of Hell, because I really like the Rodin Gates of Hell that are at the Rodin Museum.
Yes.
And I was thinking a lot about hell and what a powerful tool of fear hell has been for me and for a lot of people. And if you really kind of think about it, it's I don't know, I was kind of playing with like, if I were in charge of hell, I think I know who I would send there. And it's very different than the kinds of people I grew up learning about who, like acts that you would go to hell if you committed are very different than like my ideology today. So thinking about sin and immorality and hell and kind of like how people see themselves as good or bad, and looking at that through like a class lens also.
That's really interesting. Yeah, I have been to Glen Foerd until 2020. I was a sound engineer, and so I've worked weddings there. They have like a big tent out there, and I worked weddings outside. So they're a really beautiful place.
Amazing.
But with those beautiful places, there always comes that. It's so interesting. I guess what I'm saying is it's so interesting to learn more about it, and kind of place faces to the like ghosts that I kind of knew existed there. That makes sense.
Yeah. And I will say that like the people who work at Glen Foerd right now are amazing, and they do not represent the leather factory owners. Like I think they invited me because they really liked that I would kind of challenge the history, and they've had other artists come and also do pieces that are a little bit critical and a little bit like delving into the alternative history of the place. And so I think that they have a really interesting program that they're doing to try and like figure out why we still need to preserve places like this, and like what can we actually use them for that's good. So I would encourage anyone who's in the area to go there, because it actually is really awesome, even though it was once very evil wealthy man's house. It is more than that, I think, when you get into it.
Yeah, yeah. Cool. You talking about Rodin's Gates of Hell and designing hell and all of that stuff, and also like one of your voices being one of Protestantism. I'm wondering what if you feel that your relationship to the art that you make, or your relationship to the community that you build, or your relationship to anything at all, feels um, spiritual in nature or like supplementary to, that.
Yeah, definitely. I think when I first started being part of like political organizations, it reminded me a lot of church.
Hmm.
When I used to go to like a video game indie developer meetup, that reminded me of church. Yeah, I feel like I haven't been to church in a long time, but there was definitely a void left behind from not going, and that void is like a need for like a community that is very united and passionate about one topic that is like extremely important and urgent.
Hmm.
And there's not a lot that really matches that except for like being in a cult. Uh, so yeah, I would look for like the next best thing. And anytime that people are getting together for like like an unpaid, non-obligated reason, that has like church vibes to me, but in a good way, usually.
Hmm.
Yeah, any kind of like community of people who gather like on purpose and really like being together and are working on something and care a lot about it has kind of like helped fill the void for me. So yeah, creative communities can be like that. Political organizing is a lot like church sometimes, and sometimes in bad ways. So I've had to be aware of like sometimes how I'm using these things to get back into old harmful cycles. But overall, I think like yeah, I understand the role that religion plays for a lot of people, and a big part of it is like having a community. And outside of religion, I don't think like in our capitalist nightmare right now, we have like a lot of community built in. People are pretty isolated from their neighbors and from their coworkers at a lot of jobs. And um yeah, I get why people need community, and I'm finally feeling very aware of my need for it. So yeah, I think it's important to like understand what you're looking to get out of these places, and like be intentional about uh yeah, going to look for that thing you need, and maybe not like all the extra baggage of like fire and brimstone and hell, if that's not like helpful to you.
Yeah, for sure. There's some stuff we can just leave behind.
Yeah, exactly.
I was asking, we were talking at the very beginning of this conversation about, I guess like our radicalization over like individual radicalization over the last 18 months, and with regard to our art, and both for both of us, and I think one of the things that hit me while you were talking about all of that and spirituality and stuff is I think that I would probably say that my art is like the most religious it's ever been, and only getting more so.
Wow.
But I would also say that like that's such an individual definition, right? Like I am not religious um in a traditional sense,
Yeah.
but my like interaction with all of this stuff feels like, yeah, it feels like that. It feels like something I haven't really ever known otherwise, or maybe have seen and felt like an outsider too, or like stood on the edge of, whether it's a community that I would like to have belonged to, or should, could have belonged to, or whatever, and maybe didn't because of, whatever, zealotry, or I didn't
Yeah.
agree with the fire and brimstone part or something. But that's been something that I think I've been sort of putting words to, over the last 18 months for sure, is that when I do the work, whatever that is, whether it's making art or showing art or sharing art or collaborating or building community around art or whatever, that feels, we're taking it in, even I went to the show last night. I actually don't know that band. Like I know their name, but I didn't really know them. They're one of my sister's favorite bands.
Yeah.
And I hadn't been to a concert since I probably mixed sound for one, but in almost 2 years ago. And I got really emotional. Like
Aw.
that's so powerful, like a space like that is just so important.
Yeah.
And all of I guess that comes back to like, it comes back to like community and labor and stuff too. Like every facet of that moment, of a moment like last night, of a moment like a concert, every person in that space is integral, you
Yeah.
can't tell me that, a mosher is an untrained worker. Like, they're doing a crucial job, for that micro community. They're doing a crucial job. Like they are integral to that functioning correctly, as a piece of whatever, as a piece of art, as a piece of spirituality or whatever, to bring people together, to heal people, and
Yeah.
it's just like really interesting, I guess, to think about, which is sort of why I asked you in that way.
Yeah, I agree. I'm also making like the most religious work I've ever made. And some of it is definitely like criticizing religion.
Mhm.
But I'm trying to not be totally negative about it, honestly, because I think like what's so interesting to me too uh about labor and religion is the fact that like it gives people so much personal meaning and identity.
Mhm.
So I think it is so interesting how people romanticize their work sometimes, even if it's a difficult job, and like um they find something really meaningful in whatever task they do. And obviously for a lot of people, spirituality is also a way that they're getting meaning in their life. And
Mhm.
I think that's very cool. Like, even if I'm not necessarily participating in either one, like I'm more of like someone who doesn't like work and doesn't like going to church, but I I find it really fascinating how these things become like more than the task for people. It like kind of sometimes transcends what they're doing day to day, and it becomes more of like a spiritual experience for them to be like, I am the mailman, and like
Yeah. Yeah.
it is so important to me to deliver letters on this route. And
Uh,
I feel like a
yeah.
really beautiful thing.
Totally.
The work is difficult.
I I can't tell you how fast that would become me. I just moved to the city and I met my mail lady. She's a walking mail lady, and I asked if she liked her job, and she said she loved it. And I told her that she'd been doing it for 18 years, and I told her that I was like considering it. I was like, oh, it seems like a really interesting job. She's like, oh, I could like get you a job, blah 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 blah. It turns out I'm newly employed elsewhere, so that's that back burner thing. But I actually had that thought. I was like, oh man, I would make this would be such a spiritual experience for me every single day.
Yeah, I mean, it's a difficult job, but I'll say it's a good union job, and
Yeah,
I
totally.
think it allows people to enjoy their work more and find meaning in it when they have power at work and some kind of like individual agency over their day-to-day life, I think, is key. So
Right. And that kind of camaraderie.
we love the USPS.
Yeah, definitely. It's really interesting. It was interesting to hear you say, especially with Nava being in the audience, that like you talking about your background, your religious background, and saying, that your art, talking about your art, criticizing religion as well as talking about it or whatever. And I was struck by many conversations that I've shared with Nava, who has been a resident artist. Hey there, Nava. Yes, come up.
I listen to both of you, and there's so many little moments where I always feel like I just want to say, like, I feel like it resonates with me. So many levels.
But I was
and
thinking,
it's exciting.
I was thinking about conversations that Nava and I've had like many different times. Nava and I both coming from Jewish backgrounds, both of which very, very different in our lives, but sharing that and that it's so interesting when I know for me, whenever I talk to somebody who may have had an upbringing that has been Christian in some sense, that it's almost like an exception to the rule to talk about criticizing Jewish spirituality, because I find it pretty much I can't say across the board, but at least in my conversations with this one other person who I care about, that it's integral. It's integral to talk about that. It's integral to be criticizing the thinking and the philosophies and the ideologies. And I think that's so interesting. It's so fascinating.
Yeah, and I also just feel like Christianity is so tied up with capitalism in America.
Mm-hmm.
That the more I learn about like becoming a labor organizer and understanding like my social and political standpoint, the more I have to understand, how eerily similar some of like my religious experiences have been to capitalist experiences, and how they both have this dominant like chokehold on the US specifically. It's very interesting to think about.
Yeah, that is interesting. Nava, do you have you said that there were some things that pinged thoughts in you?
Yeah. I just sometimes I don't know when I can enter the conversation. Yeah, I grew up in a religious family, and religion is part of my life. And as a child, of course, I hated it, and I had to do so many things in the name of religion that I didn't believe. And if I was not doing what I've been told, I've been considered as a bad girl. So I grew up hating religion, and but as I get older, and especially as an artist, going back into my material and memories and thinking about body and body as archive, and I slowly return back on my own terms. Like I go back to delve into content and context that with perhaps kind of a desire to find my own way of deconstructing rigid structures that comes from religion, even though there's such beauty in it, in certain stories and in other contexts that I'm interested in exploring. So I think I understand the feeling of like, do we need to validate our interest in going back to religion or dealing with religion context in our work as an artist? And I slowly moving away from it. Like I gradually feel that I don't need to explain why religion content and Judaism is important for me. And so Yeah, so you go back to it on your own terms, and I also I agree with the experience of being transcending, or the spiritual experience of entering into religion content, and how it feels. So yeah, so Jacob, you also said in the last 18 months you've been more than ever going back to like delving into religion, and it's probably all because of this particular period that we are in between. It's, if we think about religion, actually this is a global rite of passage. I think we talked about it in our conversation. And
Yeah.
yeah, I just wanted to share my thoughts about religion, and as an artist, constantly looking for meanings and materials, not necessarily just like tangible materials, but also spiritual materials. I find myself going back to religion, and I think I've been in that period where I was thinking, or maybe kind of intimidated by the response of people when I had to share some description of my work, but not anymore. But I think it's a process. It's a process, and it's really encouraging to hear your thoughts about it.
Yeah,
Yeah,
definitely.
I think I know exactly what you're talking about with your like kind of returning to spirituality for yeah, I think like how I would express it, or how I've been thinking about it, is that like whether you agree with your religious upbringing now, I think just the fact that you come up into something from the very beginning of your life, like from childhood, like your brain is structured based on that. And so that's the framework you have, and you're never going to totally get rid of it, I don't think. So it can be really helpful to kind of go back and like ruminate on that framework, and like understand how you got to a certain way of thinking, and like what's kind of like lurking there subconsciously that you don't even remember getting programmed with, I think is super interesting. And yeah, I love like meeting people who are religious or who have left religion, because I feel like wherever they are in relationship to it, the fact that we came up in the same way feels like a really cool connection. Like I understand how their brain works in a very cool way.
Yeah. That's interesting. That's interesting. Yeah, that's such a big conversation. We
Yeah.
might not have time to jump into. I'm thinking about on a personal level. Uh, yeah, I could probably do a lot of work and realize um, how many different facets of who I am now, as I exist and persist both in a pandemic and in the perpetual sort of global and communal trauma that we experience, and also as I get older and more confident in myself and comfortable knowing myself, that I actually think that I have totally returned to not even religious, not even talking about religion, but just childhood habits,
Yeah.
like kind of like returning to my childhood a lot in a lot of different ways. And I think that's very much kind of on par with what you're talking about. Um,
Yeah, definitely.
just the programming, right? The programming that we are given or give ourselves.
Yeah. I want to mention this thing that I'm obsessed with, but I forgot what it's called. I can look this up later and figure out if there's a term for it. But I learned recently, I think I was just listening to some interview about there's like this framework that historians use to talk about like the development of societies or like cultures or technologies, where like the way something came to be, like the way something was invented or the process of doing it ends up informing the future in a really interesting way. And so that might make no sense, but an example would be the QWERTY keyboard, QWERTY, is actually an inefficient layout for keys, and it's a slower arrangement of typing than a lot of other arrangements of letters could be. And that's because when people use typewriters for the first time, they could only type so fast or the typewriter would jam. So they were designed to be inefficient for typing to make sure people wouldn't jam them.
Whoa.
So now, today, we haven't changed the layout of the keyboard, even though it is not the most efficient way to type. So I think about that a lot. And it kind of like reminds me of what we're talking about now, which is just like the way you start out in the world is going to inform everything you do afterwards, and you can definitely make changes and grow a lot, but your history has taken you on a certain path that it's really interesting to kind of be aware of and notice how you're carrying something into the future, not necessarily because it makes the most sense, but because it's just kind of how you evolved.
Right, it's you.
Think about
you.
Yeah.
Well, that's like, at the very beginning of our conversation, I said that I feel that my art is self-portraiture, but even that like is exactly what you're talking about. I think I only say that as a reminder to myself that I wouldn't ever want to say that it's anything else, because like, of course it's going to be self-portraiture because I'm the one doing it and I'm the one making it, and I'm the one working and thinking and creating these ideas based on the kind of like design language of my history.
Yeah.
I'm like, I think the other way that I like to say it is like I'm a filter feeder, like this like very inefficient filter feeder, but it's not really, but then art it really isn't about efficiency, so I get to just like live and take information in and then figure out how it manifests when it comes out of me.
I feel a lot like a filter too. I feel sometimes like I'm like a little shrimp eating trash off the ocean floor and comes out every now and then.
Yeah. Cool. Filter feeders. It's a good narrative for, kind of like I don't know, demystifying it too. Like I feel like those things that kind of relates to everything else we've been talking about. It's really like it's a helpful narrative to be like, this is what I am. I'm just a little worker guy, and that's really important.
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, well, I don't know if we want to touch on anything else. If we have any other questions, if you have any other questions or thoughts, I know we're at a pretty good moment.
Yeah, I feel like we've talked about a lot of things, but if there's other stuff, I don't know. If you have any questions,
I've definitely been working on trying to make these a tangible size because I'm recording them, so it's nice to have them like a digestible size. But no, Nava, if you have any thoughts or questions, ideas.
First of all, I just wanted to say thank you. It's such a pleasure to look at your work and listen to you, Tabitha, and your practice, and in such an intimate setting. I really, really love your work, and I have to say it feels such a Sisyphean process, if I may say, in terms of like details that comes into your work. And this is just my kind of feeling that I get when I look at your work, and it reminds me of an amazing artist, choreographer. Her name is Noah Eshkol. She's
Never heard of that artist.
yeah. I don't know why your work is reminding me of her work as well, in which she was an interdisciplinary artist. So she worked in between choreography, movement, body, and textile. And it's very interesting to see how she has been kind of conceptually not translating, but kind of processing movement and gestures of the body into this beautiful visual tapestry. So I just wanted to mention.
I will definitely. Oh, cool! Thanks you for sharing that link, Jacob. Definitely gonna look at that.
Yeah, me too. I don't think I've looked at her work, so I'll be happy to look at that. Yeah, thank you, Tabitha, for our chat. Of course, this has been super awesome. It's been so lovely to reach out so quickly and then have you be so interested and then actually be able to make the turnaround happen.
Yeah.
That was awesome. And thank you, Nava, for being here. That was such a unexpected gem. So really nice to have you with us always.
Yeah, and I'm definitely gonna look at your work too. It's nice to meet you. I feel like it's a little bit one-sided that you've seen mine. I haven't seen yours. I don't know what to say about it, but I'm gonna.
You know what?
Gonna scroll up and find it.
I think I've seen your work. I was looking at your work after I've joined the conversation. So I was first listening to you before looking at the images, and it feels to me more powerful than the images because you've been talking really about kind of almost like an existential concerns about being an artist and what it means to be an artist. Who am I? What I do? What my work is? What the labor of my work? Can I see myself as a working artist or as a practicing artist? Or these questions are, it's showing so much vulnerability, and it's that means a lot to me. I think it's an ongoing contemplation and struggle to understand our place in the world as an artist.
Well, that's great. It sounds like that's kind of the goal of the whole talk. So I'm glad it's
Yeah, totally. You know what? I realized I have one final question. I actually meant to ask earlier when we were talking about like unionizing and things. I'm thinking about this space as being one that a lot of artists are in, and a lot of working artists, thankfully, my friends and peers and whatnot. But also a lot of young people who may be in high school or maybe in college and are trying to do their work, trying to make work. I wonder if you have, just based on your art experience and your community building and labor, union building experience. I wonder if you have any like advice for somebody new in that, or who might want to access resources that like give them tools in spaces like that.
Yeah. I guess it depends. If you're a freelancer, I'm not super sure. I'm getting into that myself, and I'm learning. Some cities have like sort of like freelance unions that are not formal, but like places where people share like wages and stuff. So it might be helpful to look up like wage sharing for whatever industry you're in. I actually use this I believe it's from Lightbox, but I might be wrong. I use a little like database sometimes where artists share how much different like publications paid them for like magazine illustrations and stuff like that, or magazine covers. So I'll look at that sometimes to figure out how much to charge people or what I should expect to ask for. If you work at like an institution where you have coworkers and you're a W-2 employee, you can form a union, and that also kind of depends where you are. A lot of cities would have some kind of workers center where you can go and get materials to help you. A lot of cities also have unions who you can always just reach out to them and ask to meet with a union organizer to get advice. That's something I did here in Philly. I reached out to someone at Unite here just to get like a first conversation where I asked somebody all kinds of questions about how to do it, and they were super, super helpful and just sat down with me for like 2 hours and talked me through it. So yeah, looking up unions that are already established, they're often willing to help. DSA, Democratic Socialists of America, has like an emergency workplace organizing program that they started during the pandemic, and I believe that's a partnership with a larger union also. But I know they have like a form you can fill out on their website, so wherever you are, if you filled that out, they would reach out to you and somebody would support you and answer your questions. But yeah, definitely like going to a person as a resource is really good, because there's a lot of legal jargon and a lot of like technique that could get very overwhelming. So it's great to find somebody who's done it. And the great thing about people in unions is that they're typically very friendly and really want to help each other. So union organizers are often more than happy to either sit down with you themselves or find someone else who can support you. And yeah, that's what I would say as far as like workplace protections, but also just in general, like get to know your coworkers and be nice to them, and see people in your industry as your friends. And I think that is always going to get you further than being competitive and thinking that we all have to fight for one little crumb.
Definitely. Cool. I think that's awesome. I hope that's going to be very useful for everybody that listens to this. So
I hope so.
Yeah. Cool. All right.
Well, they can DM me or email me too, because I have some experience, and if I can help, I will, and if not, I'll know who to point them to.
Yeah, awesome. Cool. Well, anybody listening in the future, that's a really powerful connection. So cool. Well, this has been such an awesome evening. This is my first resident artist chat in my office space in Philly, in my home in Philadelphia. This is awesome. So thank you for helping me to like christen this space. This has been super cool. Yeah, I'm so happy to have had this and be here and all that.
That's great. Yeah, welcome to Philly.
Yeah, thank you. Cool. Well, I'll get off and enjoy your evenings, and I'll talk to you soon.
Yeah, thanks so much, Jacob. Have a good night.
You too. Bye.
Bye.